In the heart of the Tibetan mountains, in an ancient and venerable monastery, lived a young monk named Tenzin. Since childhood, Tenzin had been raised in the teachings of Buddhism, dedicating his life to the pursuit of enlightenment. However, as the years passed, he felt a growing restlessness in his heart. The monastery was a place of great activity. Hundreds of monks practiced together, studied the sutras, performed elaborate rituals, and welcomed pilgrims from all over the world. For many, it was an inspiring and enriching environment. But for Tenzin, it gradually became a source of distraction and inner turmoil. He observed his fellow monks, noticing how many seemed content with the daily routine and rituals. But Tenzin longed for something deeper. In the few hours of silence he could find, usually late at night when everyone was asleep, he glimpsed moments of peace and clarity that seemed to vanish with the dawn and the start of daily activities. One day, during a long ceremony, Tenzin found himself unable to focus on the chants and prayers. His eyes wandered to the open window, where he could see the distant mountains, majestic and silent. In that moment, he felt a deep call in his heart, a call to solitude, to silence, to a more intimate and personal quest for truth. That night, unable to sleep, Tenzin sought the counsel of his master, the Venerable Lama Dorje. The old Lama listened patiently as Tenzin expressed his doubts and his yearning for a deeper practice. Lama Dorje smiled gently and said, "Tenzin, you are hearing the call of your own heart. The Buddha taught many paths to enlightenment, and for some, the path of solitude is necessary. In the mountains to the north, there is an ancient cave where great masters have meditated in the past. Perhaps it is time for you to embark on your own journey." The Lama's words resonated deeply with Tenzin. He felt a mixture of excitement and apprehension. The idea of leaving the safety of the monastery and facing the unknown was daunting, yet at the same time, he knew it was the next necessary step in his spiritual journey. In the days that followed, Tenzin prepared for his departure. He studied maps of the mountainous region, gathered basic supplies, and spent hours in meditation, strengthening his resolve. His fellow monks, though surprised by his decision, supported him with words of encouragement and blessings. On the eve of his departure, Tenzin had one last meeting with Lama Dorje. The old master looked deeply into his disciple's eyes and said, "Remember, Tenzin, true solitude is not merely the absence of others, but the full presence of oneself. You will face challenges, fears, and doubts, but if you remain true to your path, you will discover a strength and wisdom that has always been within you." With these words echoing in his mind, Tenzin prepared to begin his journey at dawn, heading into the unknown, but with his heart open to the lessons that solitude had to offer. At dawn, with the first ray of sunlight touching the snow-capped peaks, Tenzin departed from the monastery. His heart was filled with conflicting emotions: excitement for the adventure ahead, apprehension for the unknown, and a twinge of sadness as he left the place that had been his home for so many years. The path to the cave was arduous and little traveled. Tenzin followed deep valleys, crossed icy rivers, and climbed steep slopes. With each step, he felt he was not only physically distancing himself from the monastery, but also entering new territory on his spiritual journey. In the first few days, Tenzin was struck by the overwhelming silence of nature. Accustomed to the constant buzz of the monastery, the silence of the mountains felt almost deafening. He began to notice the subtle sounds that had previously gone unnoticed: the whisper of the wind through the trees, the distant roar of a waterfall, the occasional song of a solitary bird. As he progressed, Tenzin found himself confronted with physical and mental challenges. The terrain became tougher, and he needed to summon all his strength and determination to continue. There were moments when doubt assailed him. Had he made the right decision? Was he prepared for the solitude he sought? During one particularly cold night, sheltered under a rocky overhang, Tenzin reflected on the words of Lama Dorje. True solitude is not merely the absence of others, but the full presence of oneself. He began to understand that this journey was not just about reaching a physical destination, but about an inner journey of self-discovery. On the seventh day of his journey, Tenzin faced his greatest challenge. A sudden and violent storm caught him off guard on an exposed mountain pass. The wind howled, the snow blinded him, and for a terrifying moment, he lost all sense of direction. It was in this moment of despair that Tenzin experienced his first profound lesson in solitude. Forced to take shelter in a small cave, Tenzin found himself truly alone for the first time in his life. There was no one to help him, no one to comfort him, no one to guide him. In that moment of extreme vulnerability, he turned inward. Sitting in a meditative position, Tenzin focused on his breath, as he had done countless times before. But this time was different. Without the distractions of the outside world, without the comforting presence of his fellow monks, he found himself face to face with his own being. Fear, doubt, uncertainty. All of these arose in his mind with crystal clarity. Instead of fighting against these feelings or trying to suppress them, Tenzin observed them with compassionate curiosity. He began to see that these emotions, just like the storm outside, were transient. They came with force but would eventually pass. When the storm finally subsided, Tenzin emerged from his shelter transformed. He had faced his deepest fears and discovered an inner strength he didn't know he possessed. The rest of the journey, though still challenging, was marked by a new sense of purpose and clarity. Finally, after 2 weeks of travel, Tenzin spotted the cave described by Lama Dorje. Perched high on a slope overlooking a serene valley, the cave seemed to emanate an aura of peace and ancient wisdom. As he approached the entrance of the cave, Tenzin paused. He looked back at the long path he had traveled and then at the cave before him. He understood that he was crossing a threshold not only in his physical journey, but in his spiritual one. With a deep sigh, he entered the cave, ready to embark on the next phase of his quest for enlightenment. The first days in the cave were a test of adaptation for Tenzin. The silence, which had been a novelty during his journey, now became a constant and at times oppressive presence. Without the distractions of the outside world or the familiar structure of the monastery, Tenzin found himself face to face with the turmoil of his own mind. Initially, he tried to maintain a strict routine similar to that of the monastery. He would wake before dawn, meditate for long hours, recite sutras, and practice visualization. However, he soon realized that this approach was more a way to avoid the real work that needed to be done, the direct confrontation with his own being. One night, unable to sleep, Tenzin stepped out of the cave and looked up at the vast starry sky. The immensity of the universe made him feel insignificant, yet deeply connected to everything. It was in that moment that he had a realization. His quest for enlightenment had, until then, been partly driven by ego, by the desire to become someone special or illuminated. This understanding shook him to his core. In the days that followed, Tenzin entered a period of intense introspection. Memories from his childhood, repressed fears, unfulfilled desires, all of this began to surface in his consciousness. There were moments when he felt overwhelmed, tempted to abandon everything and return to the comfort and familiarity of the monastery. It was during one of these moments of doubt that Tenzin remembered a story Lama Dorje used to tell about an ancient Zen master. A young monk sought guidance from a famous master, asking for direction in his practice. The master took him to a turbulent river and asked, "What do you hear?" The young man replied, "I hear the roar of the waters, master." The master then said, "Stay here and listen until you hear what the waters are really saying." The young man stood there for days, confused and frustrated. Finally, exhausted, he stopped trying to hear something specific and simply opened himself to the experience. In that moment, he clearly heard the voice of the waters. "Become one with me. Become one with me." This story resonated deeply with Tenzin. He realized he had been trying to force his experience of solitude rather than simply allowing it to teach him. With this new understanding, Tenzin shifted his approach. Instead of battling the thoughts and emotions that arose, he began to observe them with curiosity and compassion. When fear emerged, he welcomed it like an old friend. When sadness visited him, he embraced it tenderly. When spontaneous joy bubbled up, he celebrated it fully. One of the most difficult challenges Tenzin faced was confronting his own mortality. On a particularly dark night, he found himself consumed by the fear of death. The solitude of the cave seemed to amplify this fear, making him feel small and vulnerable in the face of the universe's vastness. That night, instead of fleeing from this fear, Tenzin decided to confront it directly. He sat in meditation and visualized his own process of dying, moment by moment. As he did this, a sense of peace began to envelop him. He realized that death, like life, was merely part of a larger cycle. By fully accepting his mortality, Tenzin found a new appreciation for the preciousness of each moment. Another significant challenge was dealing with the absence of external validation. In the monastery, there was always the approval of the master, the recognition of fellow monks, the gratitude of lay people. In the solitude of the cave, Tenzin had to learn to find validation within himself. There were days when he questioned whether he was making progress, whether his practice was correct. Gradually, he learned to trust his own experience, to recognize the subtle signs of inner growth without the need for external confirmation. As the months passed, Tenzin began to notice profound changes within himself. His mind, once restless and often distracted, became calmer and more focused. He developed a keen sensitivity to the rhythms of nature around him, the movement of the seasons, the changes in the sky, the habits of the animals that occasionally visited the area near the cave. More significantly, Tenzin began to experience moments of deep clarity and connection. These were not the ecstatic states he had initially sought, but something more subtle and profound, a feeling of being completely at peace with what is, of being one with the flow of existence. In these moments, all doubts and struggles seemed to dissolve. Tenzin understood, not just intellectually but at a deep level of his being, the truth of the Buddha's words about impermanence, non-self, and the interconnectedness of all things. As he faced and overcame these internal challenges, Tenzin gradually transformed. Solitude, which had initially felt like a burden, became his greatest teacher. He was learning not only to be alone, but to be fully present with himself and the world around him. As the months passed, Tenzin's meditation practice deepened in ways he had never imagined possible. Free from the distractions and obligations of the monastery, he was able to fully dedicate himself to exploring his mind and consciousness. His daily routine became more fluid and natural. Tenzin would wake with the sunrise, spend long hours in meditation, interspersed with contemplative walks through the surrounding nature, and practicing yoga to keep his body healthy. In the evenings, before sleeping, he reflected on his experiences of the day, jotting down insights in a small journal. One of the major transformations Tenzin experienced was in his vipassana meditation practice. In the monastery, he had learned the basic techniques, but now, in the solitude of the cave, his practice gained a new depth. He began to observe the sensations in his body and the movements of his mind with unprecedented clarity. One day, during a particularly intense meditation session, Tenzin had a profound experience. As he observed his breath, he suddenly felt as if he were dissolving. The boundaries between his body and the environment around him seemed to disappear. For a fleeting moment, he experienced a state of complete union with everything around him. When the experience passed, Tenzin was both awed and slightly frightened by the intensity of what he had felt. This experience marked a turning point in his practice. Tenzin realized that meditation was not just a technique to calm the mind, but a powerful tool for exploring the fundamental nature of reality and consciousness. In the following months, Tenzin explored different forms of meditation. He practiced metta-meditation, cultivating love and compassion for all beings. Initially, he found it challenging to direct feelings of kindness toward those who had hurt him in the past. But with persistent practice, he began to feel a genuine expansion of his heart, capable of embracing even those he had once considered enemies. Tenzin also delved into Dzogchen meditation, an advanced practice aimed at recognizing the pure and primordial nature of the mind. This practice challenged him to go beyond all techniques and simply rest in naked awareness, without elaboration or effort. It was during these sessions that Tenzin began to glimpse what ancient texts referred to as the Buddha nature, the luminous and compassionate quality inherent in all things. One challenge Tenzin faced in his practice was what Buddhists call makyo, illusory experiences or hallucinations that can arise during deep meditation. There were moments when he saw bright lights, heard celestial sounds, or had visions of divine beings. Remembering the teachings of his masters, Tenzin learned not to cling to these experiences, recognizing them as mere manifestations of his mind in altered states. As his practice deepened, Tenzin noticed significant changes in his daily life. his mind became more stable and equanimous. Small irritations that once disturbed him barely rippled the surface of his consciousness. He developed a keen sensitivity to the mental and emotional states of other beings, even from a distance. Sometimes during his walks, he could sense the fear of a hidden animal or the joy of a singing bird, as if they were his own emotions. One of Tenzin's deepest realizations came through his meditation on impermanence. Observing the changes in the mountains around him, the passing clouds, the seasons that came and went, the rocks that slowly wore away, he began to deeply internalize the transient nature of all things. This understanding brought a sense of freedom and lightness to his being. He realized that his quest for enlightenment, his attachment to the identity of monk or practitioner, were also transient constructs. With this realization, Tenzin's practice underwent another subtle but significant transformation. Instead of seeking elevated states or extraordinary experiences, he began to open fully to the ordinary experience of each moment. The sound of the wind, the touch of the cold rock, the taste of fresh water, each experience became an opportunity for awakening, to recognize the luminous and empty nature of all existence. As the years went by, the cave ceased to be a retreat and became a home for Tenzin. His meditation practice fused with every aspect of his life. Whether sitting in formal contemplation, preparing a simple meal, or gazing at the stars at night, each moment was imbued with a meditative quality, a full and awakened presence. Tenzin's transformation was not sudden or dramatic. It was a gradual process, like the smooth wearing down of a stone by the constant flow of a river. Days turned into months, months into years, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, Tenzin became the very embodiment of the teachings he had studied for so long. One morning, as he stepped out of the cave for his usual walk, Tenzin was taken aback by his own reaction to the sunrise. The vibrant colors, the gradual shift from darkness to light, the indescribable beauty of the moment, all struck him with overwhelming force. Tears of gratitude and joy streamed down his face as he realized he had reached a level of perception and understanding he had once only imagined possible. In that moment, Tenzin understood that his journey of transformation through meditation was not a path to reach somewhere, but an awakening to the beauty and fullness that had always been present in every moment. With this realization, he felt ready for the next chapter of his journey, sharing the fruits of his practice with the world. After 7 years of deep solitude and intensive practice, Tenzin felt it was time to return to the world. This decision did not stem from personal desire or nostalgia, but from a profound understanding that true wisdom must be shared to benefit all beings. On the morning of his departure, Tenzin performed one last meditation in the cave that had been his home. He felt immense gratitude for everything he had experienced and learned in that sacred place. With a light heart and a clear mind, he began his journey back to the monastery. The descent from the mountain was very different from the ascent he had made years earlier. Where there had once been struggle and uncertainty, now there was grace and acceptance. Tenzin moved in harmony with the landscape, as if he were part of it. Each step was a meditation, each breath a prayer of gratitude. Upon reaching the first villages at the foot of the mountains, Tenzin noticed how much the world had changed, or perhaps how much he had changed. People looked at him with curiosity, some recognizing in him a special quality they could not name. Unintentionally, Tenzin found himself sharing simple teachings with those who approached him, offering words of comfort and wisdom that arose spontaneously in response to each individual's needs. Finally, after weeks of travel, Tenzin spotted the familiar towers of the monastery where his journey had begun. His heart filled with emotion at the thought of his brother monks and his old master, Lama Dorje. As he entered through the monastery gates, Tenzin was met with astonishment and joy. Many did not initially recognize him, for he had changed profoundly. His face, though marked by time and the elements, radiated a serenity and compassion that touched everyone who saw him. Lama Dorje, now very old, received Tenzin with tears in his eyes. The old master looked deeply into his disciple's eyes and smiled, recognizing the transformation that had taken place. Without words, master and disciple embraced, engaging in a silent communication that transcended any verbal teaching. In the days that followed, Tenzin shared his experiences with the monastic community. He spoke about the challenges of solitude, the deep revelations of intensive meditation, and the lessons nature had taught him. But more than his words, it was Tenzin's presence that conveyed the fruits of his practice. His unwavering calm in difficult situations, his spontaneous compassion for all beings, and his ability to be fully present in each moment inspired everyone around him. Tenzin discovered that his experience of solitude had given him a unique capacity to connect deeply with others. Paradoxically, his years of isolation had made him more attuned to the needs and sufferings of those around him. He could see beyond masks and pretenses, touching people's hearts with a compassionate understanding that transcended words. One day, a troubled young monk sought Tenzin, struggling with doubts about his vocation. Instead of offering advice or reprimands, Tenzin simply invited the young man for a walk. As they walked through the monastery gardens, Tenzin shared his own journey, including his moments of doubt and despair. The young monk, touched by Tenzin's honesty and vulnerability, found within himself the courage to continue on his path. As news of Tenzin's return spread, people from all around the region began to come to the monastery in search of his teachings. However, Tenzin did not see himself as a guru or an enlightened being. He continued to live simply, performing his daily tasks with total presence and dedication. His deepest teachings were often conveyed not through formal lectures, but in casual encounters, helping in the kitchen, working in the garden, or simply sitting in silence with someone in need. A remarkable aspect of Tenzin's return was how he integrated his experience of solitude into community life. He taught his brother monks to find moments of solitude even amidst daily activities, cultivating an inner space of quietude and clarity. At the same time, he fostered a new appreciation for the interconnectedness of all beings, showing how true wisdom flourishes not in complete isolation, but in the balance between solitude and communion. Over time, the monastery transformed under Tenzin's subtle influence. The practice became less rigid and more integrated into daily life. The monks learned to find the sacred in the simplest acts, in cleaning, preparing food, and caring for one another. Compassion and mindfulness became the heart of the practice, not just ideals to be achieved, but lived realities moment by moment. Years passed, and Tenzin continued to be a source of inspiration and wisdom for all who knew him. He never claimed titles or positions of authority, preferring to live as a simple monk. However, his influence extended far beyond the monastery walls. People from all walks of life, from farmers to political leaders, sought his guidance, drawn by his serene presence and practical wisdom. In his later years, Tenzin frequently returned to his beloved cave in the mountains for periods of retreat. These moments of solitude renewed his spirit and deepened his connection to the teachings that had transformed his life. Each time he returned, he brought with him a new layer of understanding and compassion to share with the world. At the end of his life, lying on his simple bed in the monastery, surrounded by monks and disciples, Tenzin shared his last words of wisdom. Remember, true solitude is not isolation, but union with all existence. Find that solitude within yourselves, and you will never be separated from the love and wisdom that permeate all things. With a serene smile, Tenzin closed his eyes for the last time, leaving behind a legacy of peace, compassion, and profound understanding that would continue to inspire future generations. His journey, which began with a call to solitude, ended with an embrace of the totality of life, demonstrating the transformative power of being truly alone to become truly one with everything.